The night Chicago burned, Clara Ashford learned that some fires cannot be extinguished with water. She was 16 years old, standing in the December snow while flames consumed her father's clinic. The building screamed as it died, timbers cracking like broken bones, glass shattering into 1,000 stars that fell and melted in the heat. Clara stood perfectly still, her nightgown soaked through her bare feet, bleeding on the frozen cobblestones. She did not feel the cold. She did not feel anything except the terrible knowledge that her father was still inside. The firemen held her back. Their hands were rough on her arms, but she fought them anyway. Fought with a strength born from terror and love, and the desperate animal need to save the only person who had ever mattered. But she was small, and they were many, and in the end, all she could do was watch. When they finally pulled Dr. Ashford from the wreckage, he was barely human. Burned flesh and charred clothing and something that might have been a face. But he was alive. For 3 more minutes, he was alive. Clara knelt beside him in the snow. She took his ruined hand in hers, and she did not flinch from the texture of cooked meat or the smell of burned hair. She leaned close to hear his final words. "Blackwell," he whispered. The sound was wet and broken. "James Blackwell. He knows. The letters. He knows what I found." Clara's father died with her name on his lips. She did not cry. Crying was for people who still believed the world could be fair. Instead, she reached into the pocket of his coat, the only part of him that had not burned, and pulled out a leather journal. The pages were spotted with blood. His blood. The last evidence of whatever truth had gotten him killed. That was December 1874, 5 years ago. An entire lifetime measured in the space between one girl's scream and a woman's cold, calculating silence. Now it was January 1879, and Clara Ashford no longer existed. The woman who stepped off the train in Lead, South Dakota, was Catherine Hartley, 21 years old, widow, schoolteacher, a respectable woman seeking employment in a respectable mining town. She wore black as widows do. Her hair was dark where Clara's had been blonde. Her voice carried the soft drawl of St. Louis instead of the sharp consonants of Chicago. Everything about her was designed to be forgettable, unremarkable, safe, but the eyes were the same, gray-blue like winter ice. And if anyone looked closely enough, they might see the kind of coldness that comes from watching your father burn alive. The platform was crowded with miners coming off the night shift. They moved past her in a river of dirty faces and exhausted bodies, men who had spent 10 hours underground and would spend the next 14 trying to forget it. Lead was a boom town, fat with gold and swollen with desperate men. It sprawled across the Black Hills like a wound, all raw lumber and muddy streets, and the constant thunder of the stamp mills crushing ore. Catherine adjusted her grip on the small valise she carried. Inside were the carefully forged documents that proved she was who she claimed to be. A teaching certificate from a school that had burned down 2 years ago. A marriage license for a man who had died of yellow fever in a hospital with no surviving records. Letters of recommendation from people who had never existed. The gun was wrapped in a silk petticoat. The photograph was sewn into the lining. She had spent 5 years becoming someone else. 5 years learning to lie with her face and her voice and every gesture of her body. 5 years preparing for this moment. Lead, South Dakota, the town where James Blackwell lived. The man her father had accused of being a murderer. The man whose name had been the last word on a dying man's lips. Catherine walked through the snow toward the Dakota Hotel. The wind cut through her coat like a blade, but she did not hurry. A widow in mourning did not hurry. A woman alone in a strange town moved with careful dignity. So Catherine walked slowly, her head high, her face composed. Inside, her heart hammered with something that might have been fear or might have been anticipation. The two felt remarkably similar. The hotel was one of the better establishments in town. 3 stories of whitewashed wood with actual glass windows and a sign that promised hot water and clean sheets. The lobby smelled of tobacco and wet wool. A clerk with thinning hair looked up from his ledger as she approached. "I have a reservation," Catherine said. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Catherine Hartley." The clerk consulted his book. "Ah, yes, the school teacher. Reverend Cross mentioned you'd be arriving today." He pushed a register toward her. "Just need your signature, ma'am." Catherine signed the false name with a hand that did not shake. She had practiced the signature 10,000 times until it flowed as naturally as breathing. "Reverend Cross has been most helpful in arranging my employment," she said. "I look forward to meeting with him. He said he'd call on you this evening, ma'am, around 7 if that suits." It suited perfectly. Catherine had timed her arrival to coincide with Reverend Cross's schedule. She knew his habits, knew his sermon times and his visiting hours, and the route he walked from the church to the homes of his parishioners. She had learned everything about lead before ever setting foot in the town. Knowledge was ammunition. Preparation was armor. Her room was on the second floor overlooking the main street. It was small but clean. A narrow bed, a washstand, a chair by the window. Catherine set her valise on the bed and moved to the window. From here she could see most of the town. The churches and saloons standing shoulder to shoulder, the company store and the assay office. And there on the hill beyond the edge of town, a house larger than all the others, white-clapboard, black shutters, a widow's walk on the roof, the Blackwell house. Catherine stood at the window for a long time looking at that house. Somewhere inside it lived the man who had killed her father. She was certain of it even though she had no proof. Not yet, but she would find proof. She would find the truth her father had died protecting, and then she would make James Blackwell pay for every year she had spent alone. Every night she had woken screaming from dreams of fire. Every moment of her stolen childhood. Revenge was a cold comfort, but it was the only comfort she had. At 7 o'clock precisely there was a knock at her door. Reverend Samuel Cross was not what Catherine had expected. She had imagined someone older, more severe. Instead, the man who stood in her doorway was perhaps 45, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore the simple black of a country preacher, but there was something about him that suggested he had not always worn such humble clothing. "Miss Hartley," he said, removing his hat, "welcome to Lead. I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was manageable, Reverend. Thank you for your concern." Catherine gestured to the chair. "Please sit. I am grateful for your assistance in securing this position." He settled into the chair while Catherine, perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The picture of propriety. A woman alone, careful of appearances. "The school is small," Reverend Cross said. "Only 20 students, most of them children of the miners, but they are eager to learn, and their parents value education." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You are young to be a widow, if you don't mind my saying." "I do not mind. My husband was taken by yellow fever less than a year after our marriage. It was God's will." The lie came easily. She had told it so many times that it almost felt like truth. "And you have no family, no one in St. Louis who might need you. I am alone in the world, Reverend. That is why I sought employment far from home. Too many memories." He nodded slowly. "Lead can be a hard town, Miss Hartley. The winters are brutal. The work is dangerous. We have lost many men to the mines, and the women who are left bear a heavy burden." He leaned forward slightly. "And we have had our share of tragedy beyond the mines. 3 women have died in this town in the past 7 years, all of them young, all of them in circumstances that were never fully explained." Catherine's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "How terrible. Were you able to offer them comfort in their final days?" "I was. I heard their confessions." His eyes were steady on hers. "A priest carries many burdens, Miss Hartley. The secrets of the dying weigh heaviest." There was a warning in his words, a test perhaps to see how she would react. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "I imagine it takes great strength to bear such knowledge alone." "It does." He stood replacing his hat. "The school begins on Monday. I have arranged for you to meet the students' parents tomorrow afternoon at the church. There is one family in particular I should mention, the Blackwells." Catherine's pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her voice steady. "I am not familiar with the name." "James Blackwell owns the largest mining operation in Lead. He is a widower with a daughter. Eliza is 10 years old and quite bright, but she has had a difficult time since her mother's death last year." He paused at the door. "Mr. Blackwell has requested private tutoring for his daughter in addition to her regular schooling. The position would be well compensated." I would be honored to help the child." "Good." But Reverend Cross did not smile. Instead, he looked at her with an expression that might have been pity or might have been fear. "Miss Hartley, you are certain you wish to remain in lead? I could help you find a position elsewhere, somewhere perhaps less burdened by its past." It was the second warning. Catherine understood that. The Reverend knew something about this town, about the Blackwell family, that he could not speak aloud. But he was trying in his own way to protect her. She almost felt sorry for him. "I am certain, Reverend. Lead is exactly where I need to be." He studied her face for one more long moment, then nodded. "Very well. I will pray for you, Miss Hartley. I will pray that you find what you are seeking." After he left, Catherine stood at the window again, looking out at the Blackwell house. The windows glowed with lamplight against the gathering dark. Somewhere in that house was a little girl who had lost her mother. Somewhere in that house was a man who might be a murderer. And tomorrow, Catherine would begin the careful work of destroying them both. She slept poorly that night. The dreams came as they always did, fire and screaming and her father's ruined face. But this time, when she woke in the cold darkness before dawn, she did not cry. She reached for the journal she kept hidden beneath her mattress, her father's journal. The pages were still spotted with his blood, the ink faded but legible. She read the entries she had read 1,000 times before. Notes about his patients, observations about symptoms, and there buried in the medical terminology, a pattern. 3 women, all patients of James Blackwell, all of them showing signs consistent with arsenic poisoning, all of them dead within months of their first symptoms. Her father had documented everything: the progressive weakness, the digestive problems, the sudden deterioration that mimicked natural illness. He had suspected Blackwell, but he had not confronted him directly. Instead, he had written letters to other doctors, to the authorities in Lead, warning them about his suspicions, and then his clinic had burned. An accident, the fire marshal had ruled. And a lamp knocked over in the night, but Clara had known better, had known that her father had been murdered to keep his silence. She had been alone after that, sent to an orphanage because there was no other family. She had stayed there for 2 years, growing harder and colder, until she was old enough to leave. Then she had disappeared into the vast anonymity of Chicago's streets. She had worked in factories and boarding houses. She had saved every penny. She had learned to shoot from a man who asked no questions. She had studied her father's journal until she could recite every entry from memory. And she had planned, meticulously, perfectly, a plan 5 years in the making. Now, finally, she was ready. The church meeting the next afternoon was exactly as tedious as Catherine had anticipated. She met the parents of her future students, mostly miners' wives, with work-worn hands and anxious eyes. They were grateful for a teacher, grateful for any hint of civilization in this rough place. Catherine smiled and nodded and said all the appropriate things. She was good at this, good at being what people expected to see. And then James Blackwell arrived. He came late when the meeting was nearly finished. The door opened and the room seemed to shift around him. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of physical presence that came from years of manual labor. His hair was dark graying at the temples. His face was lined and weathered, but not unkind. He wore a suit that had been tailored in Denver or perhaps San Francisco, clothes that marked him as a man of means. Catherine's first thought was that he did not look like a monster. Her second thought was that monsters never do. "Reverend Cross," Blackwell said, his voice deep and cultured, "my apologies for the delay. There was an incident at the mine." "Nothing serious, I hope," the Reverend replied. "A cave-in. No one was killed, thankfully, but it will take time to clear." Blackwell's eyes moved across the room and settled on Catherine. "You must be Miss Hartley. I am James Blackwell. I believe the Reverend mentioned that I have a daughter in need of tutoring." Catherine stood offering her hand. When he took it, his grip was firm but not crushing. His palm was calloused. The hands of a man who had worked in the mines before he owned them. "Mr. Blackwell." "Yes," the Reverend spoke of Eliza. "I would be pleased to work with her." "Excellent. Would tomorrow afternoon be convenient? I could send my carriage at 2 o'clock to bring you to the house." "That would be most kind." He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Catherine had the unsettling sense that he was evaluating her, measuring her against some invisible standard. Then he released her hand and stepped back. Until tomorrow, then. After he left, the other women resumed their conversation, but Catherine noticed that their voices had grown quieter, more careful, as if Blackwell's presence, even in absence, required a certain discretion. She filed the observation away. Everything was information. Everything was a weapon. That evening, as dusk settled over Lead, Catherine walked through the town. She needed to learn its geography, needed to understand the rhythms of the place. She passed the assay office and the company store, walked past saloons where miners drank away their wages and boarding houses where women of negotiable virtue plied their trade. This was the underbelly of boomtown prosperity, the price paid for all that glittering gold. She found herself outside a small cemetery at the edge of town. The graves were marked with simple wooden crosses, many of them already weathered and leaning. Catherine moved among them, reading names and dates. So many had died young. The mines took their toll in cave-ins and explosions and slow poisoning from the dust. But 3 graves were different. They stood together, separated slightly from the others. The crosses were newer, the wood still pale. Catherine read the names carved into the wood. Margaret Blackwell, died 1873. Rose Henley, died 1876. Elena Adams, died 1878. 3 women, 3 deaths in 5 years. Her father had been right. Whatever evil lived in the Blackwell house, it had claimed 3 victims already. Catherine knelt in the snow beside the graves. She placed her hand on the cold earth above Margaret Blackwell's resting place. "I will find out what happened to you," she whispered. "I promise." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow and coal smoke. Catherine stood and turned to leave, and found herself face to face with a child. The girl was perhaps 10 years old, thin as a rail with pale blonde hair and enormous blue eyes. She wore a coat that was too large for her, the hem dragging in the snow. She stood perfectly still, watching Catherine with an intensity that was deeply unnerving in someone so young. "You should not be here," the girl said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Catherine composed herself quickly. "I am sorry if I disturbed you. I was simply paying my respects." "You did not know them." "The dead women." "No, but I believe in honoring the departed, even strangers." The girl tilted her head, studying Catherine with those enormous eyes. "You are the new teacher, Miss Hartley." "I am. And you must be Eliza Blackwell." "Yes." The girl moved closer, her steps crunching in the snow. "My father said you would come to the house tomorrow, to teach me." "That is correct." Eliza looked past Catherine to the graves. "My mother is there. Rose. She was my second mother. My first mother is there too, Margaret. I do not remember her. She died when I was very small." Catherine's throat tightened. The child spoke of death with the same detachment one might use to discuss the weather. It was wrong. Deeply wrong. "I am sorry for your losses, Eliza. Everyone says that. But they are not sorry. They are afraid." Eliza's eyes fixed on Catherine again. "My mothers told me you would come. They told me to warn you." The word sent ice down Catherine's spine. "Your mothers told you—" "They visit me sometimes. When father is not home, they tell me things." Eliza's voice remained eerily calm. "They said a woman with sad eyes would come. They said she would not listen to warnings. They said she would stay even though she should leave." Catherine knelt down, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Eliza, have you told your father about these visits?" "No, he would not believe me. Or he would be angry. I am not sure which." The girl reached out and touched Catherine's cheek with one small cold hand. "You have sad eyes, just like they said. You are looking for something dangerous." "I am only here to teach Eliza." "No." The word was certain, final. "You are here because of the dead women. You are here because of what my father did." Catherine's blood froze. "What did your father do?" But Eliza stepped back, her expression closing like a door slamming shut. "I have to go home now. Father does not like me to be out after dark." She turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Hartley." "Yes." "The dead women want you to know something. They want you to know that you are not the first to come looking for the truth. And they want you to be careful. The house has a cellar. Do not go into the cellar." Then she was gone, running through the snow like a pale ghost, her too large coat billowing behind her. Catherine remained kneeling in the snow for a long time after the child disappeared. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was Eliza truly seeing the spirits of dead women, or had the child witnessed something terrible and constructed this fantasy as a way to process trauma? Either way, the girl's warning was clear. Danger lived in the Blackwell house, and tomorrow Catherine would walk directly into it. She returned to her hotel room as night fell. The streets of Lead were loud with the sounds of men drinking and fighting and trying to forget the darkness of the mines. Catherine locked her door and lit the lamp. She pulled her father's journal from her valise and read it again, searching for anything she might have missed. There. A note her father had written 3 weeks before his death. James Blackwell. Cannot have children. Injury sustained in mining accident 1865. Yet all 3 wives bore children or became pregnant shortly before their deaths. The conclusion is inescapable. Catherine stared at the words. Her father had suspected that Blackwell killed his wives not for money or madness, but because they had been unfaithful, because the children they carried or bore were not his. It made a terrible kind of sense. A man's pride, his honor twisted into something murderous. But it raised new questions. If Blackwell could not father children, then who was Eliza's father? And did the child know the truth about her own parentage? Catherine closed the journal and moved to the window. The Blackwell house was dark now, except for a single light in an upper window. Eliza's room, perhaps, or Blackwell's study. Somewhere in that house were the answers she sought. Somewhere in that house was the proof that would finally give her father justice. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she cleaned her gun and loaded 6 bullets into the chamber. She practiced drawing and aiming until the motion was smooth and automatic. She knew how to shoot. The man in Chicago had taught her well, but knowing how to shoot and being willing to kill were 2 very different things. Catherine looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, saw a stranger's face looking back, dark hair, pale skin, eyes like winter ice. "Who are you?" she whispered to her reflection. "Clara Ashford died in the fire with her father. Catherine Hartley is a lie. So who are you really?" The reflection had no answer. At 2 o'clock the next afternoon, a carriage arrived at the hotel. The driver was an older man with a weathered face and careful eyes. He helped Catherine into the carriage without speaking, and they rode in silence up the hill to the Blackwell house. It was larger up close. 3 stories of whitewashed wood with black shutters and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The gardens were dormant now, buried under snow, but Catherine could see the careful landscaping beneath the white blanket. This was the house of a man who valued appearances, order, control. The driver opened the carriage door and offered his hand. Catherine stepped down into the snow, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment 5 years of planning had built toward. She was walking into the house of the man who had killed her father. She was placing herself within arm's reach of a murderer. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman stood in the doorway. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of face that suggested a life of hard work and little joy. She wore a simple gray dress and a white apron. The housekeeper, Catherine assumed. "Miss Hartley," the woman said. Her voice was flat, expressionless. "Mr. Blackwell is expecting you. Please come in." Catherine stepped into the house. The interior was as carefully appointed as the exterior. Polished wood floors, heavy furniture that spoke of wealth, paintings on the walls, landscapes, mostly peaceful scenes that were at odds with the brutal reality of life in a mining town. Everything was clean. Everything was in its place. Everything felt wrong. "I am Martha," the woman said, closing the door behind them. "I keep house for Mr. Blackwell. Eliza is in the parlor. I will let Mr. Blackwell know you have arrived." She disappeared down a hallway, leaving Catherine alone in the entrance hall. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No ticking clocks, no creaking boards. It was as if the building itself held its breath. Catherine moved toward the parlor. The door was half open. Inside, she could see Eliza sitting in a chair by the fire, a book open in her lap. The child looked up as Catherine entered. "Hello, Miss Hartley," Eliza said. Her voice was different here, softer, more childlike. "I am glad you came." "Hello, Eliza. What are you reading?" "A fairy tale about a princess who sleeps for 100 years." Eliza closed the book carefully. "Do you think it is possible to sleep so long that when you wake everyone you loved is dead?" The question was asked with such innocent curiosity that it took Catherine a moment to understand the darkness beneath it. "I think it would be very sad to wake alone," Catherine said carefully. "Yes, but it might also be safe. If everyone you loved was dead, they could not hurt you anymore." Eliza stood, setting the book aside. "Would you like to see my drawings? I draw pictures of my mothers." Before Catherine could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. James Blackwell appeared in the doorway. He had changed from his suit into simpler clothing, a white shirt and dark trousers. He looked more human this way, more approachable, more dangerous. "Miss Hartley, thank you for coming." He moved into the room, his presence somehow filling the space. "I see you have already met Eliza." "We were just discussing her reading," Catherine said. "Ah, yes, fairy tales. I try to encourage more practical subjects, but Eliza has always been drawn to stories of magic and ghosts." There was something in his voice, a hint of disapproval or perhaps concern. "I hope you can help her focus on more useful knowledge." "Stories have their place, Mr. Blackwell. They teach us about human nature." "Perhaps." He looked at his daughter. "Eliza, why don't you show Miss Hartley your drawings while I speak with Martha about dinner?" Eliza took Catherine's hand. Her fingers were cold as ice. She led Catherine up a staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with closed doors to a room at the end. Eliza's bedroom was painted pale blue with white curtains and a canopy bed that looked like something from a storybook. But it was the drawings that caught Catherine's attention. They covered the walls, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, all done in pencil or charcoal, and every single one showed the same thing. Women in coffins, women with their eyes closed, women surrounded by flowers. Some of the drawings were remarkably skillful for a child of 10. Others were crude, almost primitive. But they all shared one common element. In every drawing there was a man standing in the background. His face was always turned away or obscured by shadow. But his posture suggested watching, waiting. "You draw very well," Catherine said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Thank you. My first mother taught me before she died. She said drawing helps us remember things that might otherwise be forgotten." Eliza moved to the wall and pointed to one particular drawing. "This is first mother. Margaret. She died when I was 4. I do not remember her face very well, but I remember that she smelled like roses." The drawing showed a woman with long hair spread across a pillow. Her hands were folded on her chest. Her eyes were closed. "And this is second mother, Rose. She died last year." Another drawing, another woman in a coffin. "She used to read to me every night, until she got sick." Catherine knelt beside the child. "Eliza, were you with your mothers when they died?" "I was not supposed to be. Father said I should stay in my room, but I watched through the keyhole." Eliza's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw what he did." Catherine's heart stopped. "What did you see?" But before Eliza could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. The child's eyes widened, and she stepped back. "You should go now," Eliza whispered. "Father does not like people in my room." Catherine stood just as James Blackwell appeared in the doorway. His expression was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "I see Eliza is showing you her artwork. She is quite talented, is she not? Very talented." Catherine moved toward the door, forcing herself to walk calmly. "I was just admiring her technique." "Eliza has always had a morbid fascination with death," Blackwell said. His voice was conversational, but there was an edge to it. "I have tried to encourage happier subjects, but she persists. Children process grief in many ways, Mr. Blackwell. Art can be therapeutic." "Perhaps." He gestured toward the stairs. "Shall we discuss Eliza's curriculum? I have tea prepared in my study." Catherine followed him down the stairs and through the house to a room at the back. The study was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk. A fire burned in the hearth. A tea service was laid out on a small table by the window. Blackwell poured 2 cups of tea with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to domestic tasks. He handed one to Catherine. "Sugar milk?" "Neither, thank you." Catherine took the cup but did not drink. She watched as Blackwell settled into a chair across from her. "You must think us very strange, Miss Hartley, a widower and his odd daughter in this isolated house. I think you are a family navigating grief as best you can." "Grief." He tasted the word. "Yes, there has been a great deal of that. I have buried 3 wives, Miss Hartley, 3 women I tried to love and failed to save." He stared into his teacup. "Do you believe in curses?" The question caught Catherine off guard. "I believe in cause and effect, Mr. Blackwell, not supernatural forces," a rational answer. "But sometimes rational explanations fail to satisfy." He looked up at her. "My first wife, Margaret, died of childbed fever. At least that is what the doctor said. My second wife, Rose, succumbed to a wasting illness. My third wife, Elena, simply did not wake one morning. 3 different causes, yet all 3 ended the same way, with me standing beside a grave, wondering what I could have done differently." There was genuine pain in his voice. Catherine had not expected that. She had expected a monster, a man who killed without remorse. But James Blackwell sounded like a man haunted by loss. It would be easier, she thought, if he were simply evil. "I am sorry for your losses," she said. Are you like everyone else in this town, wondering if perhaps I am responsible?" He set his teacup down with careful precision. "I know what people say, Miss Hartley, that I am cursed, or worse, that I am a murderer. 3 wives in 7 years. The mathematics are suspicious, I grant you." Catherine's pulse quickened. This was dangerous ground. "I have only just arrived and led Mr. Blackwell. I am in no position to judge." "But you will. Everyone does eventually." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. "I loved my first wife, Miss Hartley. Margaret was everything to me. When she died, I thought I would die as well. I tried to move on to marry again, to give Eliza a mother. But love is not something that can be manufactured through will alone. And without love, what is marriage but a business arrangement between strangers?" He turned to face her. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand. I did not kill my wives, but I failed them, failed to love them as they deserved, failed to protect them, and now I am left with a daughter who sees ghosts and draws pictures of dead women." Catherine forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why tell me this? Because you have kind eyes, Miss Hartley, and Eliza needs kindness. She needs someone who will not look at her with pity or fear. Can you be that person?" It was a test. Catherine understood that. He was watching her reaction, measuring her response. She thought of the journal hidden in her hotel room, her father's notes about poison and murder. She thought of Eliza's drawings and her talk of ghosts and warnings from dead women. And she thought of the plan that had consumed 5 years of her life. "I can," she said. Blackwell nodded slowly. "Good. Then we have an arrangement. You will tutor Eliza 3 afternoons a week. I will pay you generously for your time and your discretion." Discretion. "There are things about this household that need not be shared with the broader community. Eliza's difficulties, for instance. I would appreciate your keeping such matters private." Another test, another assessment of her loyalty. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell, I understand the value of privacy." "Excellent." He moved to the desk and pulled out a leather folder. "These are Eliza's previous lesson plans. You will find that she is advanced in some subjects and quite behind in others. Mathematics troubles her, but she has a gift for languages." Catherine took the folder. As she did, her fingers brushed against Blackwell's. His skin was warm, human, not the cold touch of a killer. But then she had already learned that monsters could wear very human faces. She left the Blackwell house as dusk settled over Lead. The carriage ride back to town was silent. Catherine stared out the window at the passing landscape, her mind racing. Everything she had seen today contradicted her assumptions. Blackwell seemed genuinely grieved by his wives' deaths. Eliza was a traumatized child, not a witness to murder. The house felt sad, not evil. Perhaps her father had been wrong. Perhaps the deaths had been coincidence after all. But then she thought of Eliza's drawings. The man in the background always watching. The child's whispered words, "I saw what he did." Catherine's instincts were rarely wrong. There was a monster in that house. She simply had not found it yet. She was so lost in thought that she did not notice the man following her carriage until it was too late. When the driver stopped outside the hotel, the man was waiting. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair and several days of beard growth. He wore the rough clothes of a miner or a ranch hand. His eyes were blue, startlingly blue, and fixed on Catherine with an intensity that made her hand move instinctively toward the gun hidden in her bag. "Miss Hartley," he said. His voice was deep, controlled. "I need a word with you. I do not believe we have been introduced, sir. No, but we have mutual interests." He glanced around the street. Miners were beginning to emerge from the saloons drunk and looking for trouble. Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private. Every instinct Catherine possessed screamed danger. But curiosity won. She gestured to the hotel. "The lobby is public enough for propriety, but private enough for conversation." He followed her inside. They took seats in the corner farthest from the desk clerk. The man sat with his back to the wall, his posture suggesting military training or perhaps law enforcement. Catherine catalogued every detail: the calluses on his hands, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his coat hung slightly heavier on the left side, suggesting a concealed weapon. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is William Morrison. Will to most people. I work in the mines, or at least that is what I tell people." He leaned forward slightly. "The truth is somewhat more complicated." "I have no interest in complicated truths, Mr. Morrison." "No? Then why are you using a dead woman's name?" Catherine's blood turned to ice. She forced herself to remain still, calm. "I do not know what you mean." "Catherine Hartley died of yellow fever in St. Louis 8 months ago. I have seen the death certificate. So either you are a ghost, or you are someone else wearing her name." His blue eyes bored into hers. "My question is, why would a woman need a false identity to come to lead? And more specifically, why would she seek employment in James Blackwell's household?" Catherine's hand moved to her bag. Will's eyes tracked the movement, but he did not flinch. "I would not recommend drawing that gun, miss, whoever you are. I am faster than you, and I have no desire to shoot a woman in a hotel lobby." "Then what do you want?" "The same thing you want. The truth about what happened in that house. The truth about how 3 women died." He settled back in his chair. "You are here for revenge. I can see it in your eyes. You lost someone. Father, maybe? Or a sister. Someone who tried to expose Blackwell and paid the price." Catherine said nothing. Silence was safer than lies. Will nodded as if she had confirmed his suspicion. "I understand revenge. I have spent 3 years preparing for it. But let me tell you what I have learned in those 3 years. James Blackwell is careful. He is protected by wealth and influence. And most importantly, he is innocent." "Innocent?" Catherine's voice was sharp. 3 dead wives, and you call him innocent." "I did not say he was blameless. I said he was innocent of murder." Will leaned forward again. "The women died, yes, but not by Blackwell's hand. I have seen the death certificates, talked to the doctors, interviewed everyone who was present. Blackwell did not kill his wives." "Then who did?" "That is the question, is it not?" Will's eyes were steady on hers. "Someone in that house is a killer, but it is not James Blackwell, which means you are hunting the wrong monster. And if you are not careful, you will end up as dead as the 3 women you are trying to avenge." Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to insist that her father had been right, that 5 years of planning could not be built on a foundation of lies, but Will's certainty shook her. "If not Blackwell, then who?" she asked quietly. "I do not know yet, but I have my suspicions." He stood. "Here is my advice, miss, whoever you really are. Leave Blackwell alone. Go back to wherever you came from, and forget about revenge. It will only get you killed." He turned to walk away. Catherine stood, her voice stopping him. "And if I do not leave?" Will looked back at her. In his eyes, she saw something unexpected. Not anger, not even frustration, understanding. "Then we are going to have a problem, because I have been working this case for 3 years, and I will not let an amateur with a grudge destroy my investigation." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "I know who you are. I know what you are planning, and I will stop you if I have to, for your own good." "You know nothing about me." "Do I not?" His smile was sad. "You are young, early 20s, I would guess, educated based on your speech. You have money, but not a lot, just enough for this charade. You have trained yourself to shoot probably with some cheap pistol in a Chicago back alley. And you think that revenge will fill the hole inside you where love used to be. Every word was a knife, precise, surgical. You are wrong, Catherine whispered. Am I? Then prove it. Leave tonight. Get on the first train out of Lead and never come back. I cannot. Then God help you. Will placed something on the table between them, a folded piece of paper. That is the address of my boarding house. When you realize you are in over your head, and you will come find me. I will try to save you, but I make no promises. He left, then walking out into the cold Dakota night. Catherine remained seated, her hands trembling. She unfolded the paper he had left. On it was written an address and a single line in neat, careful handwriting. Your father would not want you to die for him. Catherine's breath caught. She looked up, but Will was gone, vanished into the shadows like a ghost. How did he know about her father? She stood and walked quickly to her room, locking the door behind her. She pulled the journal from its hiding place and flipped through the pages with shaking hands. There, a list of names her father had written 3 weeks before his death, people he had contacted about his suspicions, medical colleagues, law enforcement, anyone who might help. And there at the bottom of the list, a name she had not noticed before, Dr. William Ashford, Chicago. Contacted regarding suspicious deaths in Lead SD, advised to collaborate with local authorities, Ashford. The same last name as her father, Dr. Robert Ashford. Catherine's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, the journal clutched to her chest. William Morrison was not a minor or a random investigator. He was family. He was her father's colleague, possibly even her father's relative. He knew who she was because he had known her father. And if he had known her father, then he might know the truth about the fire, about the murder, about everything. Catherine sat on the floor of her hotel room as night deepened outside. The lamp burned low. The sounds of Lead faded to distant music and laughter. She thought about Will's warning, thought about his certainty that Blackwell was innocent, thought about the 5 years she had spent preparing for a revenge that might be aimed at the wrong target. But she also thought about her father's dying words. Blackwell, he knows. And she thought about Eliza's whispered confession. I saw what he did. Someone in that house was guilty. And Catherine would find them, even if it cost her everything. She rose and moved to the window, looked out at the dark shape of the Blackwell house on the hill. Somewhere in that house, a little girl was drawing pictures of dead women. Somewhere in that house, the truth waited. And tomorrow Catherine would return, would continue her lessons with Eliza, would watch and wait and gather evidence. Because 5 years of her life had led to this moment, and she would not walk away. Not now, not ever. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, silent, covering Lead in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and innocent. But Catherine knew better. Innocence was a lie. And in this town, under all that pristine snow, something dark and terrible waited. She would find it, or die trying. The first week in Lead passed in a strange blur of normalcy and mounting dread. Catherine taught school during the mornings. 20 children crammed into a one-room building that smelled of chalk dust and wood smoke. The miners' children were hungry for knowledge in a way that city children rarely were. They listened with fierce attention when she read from books. They practiced their letters with tongues caught between teeth in concentration. They were good children, innocent children. And every time Catherine looked at them, she thought of Eliza Blackwell, who drew pictures of corpses and spoke to ghosts. 3 afternoons a week the carriage came to bring her to the Blackwell house. The routine was always the same. Martha would open the door with her flat, expressionless face. Eliza would be waiting in the parlor or the library. They would work on mathematics or history or French. James Blackwell would appear periodically, asking polite questions about his daughter's progress, offering tea that Catherine never drank. And beneath it all, a current of wrongness that Catherine could feel but not name. On the surface, the Blackwell household was unremarkable, a widower raising his daughter with the help of a housekeeper. But Catherine had learned to look beneath surfaces. She noticed the way Martha watched Blackwell when he was not looking. The expression was not fear exactly or hatred. It was something more complex, something that looked almost like pity mixed with contempt. She noticed the way Eliza never called Martha by name, never addressed her directly unless necessary. The child treated the housekeeper like a piece of furniture, useful but invisible. She noticed that certain rooms in the house were always locked. The door at the end of the second-floor hallway, the narrow staircase that led down from the kitchen. When Catherine asked about them, Martha said only that they were storage rooms, nothing of interest, but the way she said it suggested otherwise. Most of all, Catherine noticed James Blackwell himself. He was not the monster she had expected. He was patient with his daughter, gentle even in his own distant way. He never raised his voice, never showed anger or violence. But there was a profound sadness about him, a sense of a man who had loved once and lost everything and now existed in a world drained of color. It would be easier to hate him if he were cruel. On Thursday of her first week, Catherine arrived to find Eliza in an unusual state of agitation. The child was pacing the library, her hands twisting together, her eyes darting to the windows and back. "Eliza, what is wrong? He is coming today," the child said. Her voice was tight, anxious. "The doctor. Father called for him because I have been having nightmares again. Nightmares are normal for children who have experienced loss." "These are not normal nightmares." Eliza stopped pacing and looked at Catherine with those enormous blue eyes. "I dream about the cellar, about what is down there, and when I wake I can still smell it, the damp and the rust and something else, something sweet and rotten." Catherine knelt beside her. "Have you been in the cellar, Eliza?" "Once, a long time ago. Before second mother died. I found the key in Father's study and I went down the stairs." The child's voice dropped to a whisper. "There are rooms down there, rooms with chains on the walls, rooms that smell like fear." Before Catherine could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. James Blackwell appeared with an older man in a dark suit, the doctor presumably. He had gray hair and a kind face lined with years of witnessing suffering. The doctor offered his hand. "A pleasure, Miss Hartley. Any relation to William Morrison?" "He works in the mines, I believe." "We have met," Catherine said carefully, "but we are not related." "Ah, well, Morrison is common enough." The doctor's eyes grew distant. "Though it reminds me of an old colleague, Dr. Robert Ashford from Chicago, fine physician. We corresponded for years about difficult cases. He died in a terrible fire some years back." He looked at Catherine with sudden interest. "William mentioned you share an interest in medical mysteries, in unexplained deaths. Robert would have appreciated that." Catherine's pulse quickened. Dr. Morrison knew her father, and he knew Will was not truly a minor. The web of connections was tightening. "I try to understand the world through observation," Catherine said carefully, "as any educated person should." Indeed, Dr. Morrison's smile suggested he understood far more than he said. He turned to Eliza. "Now, young lady, your father tells me you have been having trouble sleeping. Why don't we have a chat about these dreams of yours?" Eliza went with the doctor without protest, leaving Catherine alone with Blackwell. He moved to the window, his posture tense. "She has always been sensitive," he said quietly. "Even as a small child she saw things that were not there, heard voices. Margaret used to say it was a gift, that Eliza could see beyond the veil between worlds." He turned to face Catherine. "What do you think, Miss Hartley? Do you believe in such things? I believe children have vivid imaginations, and that trauma can manifest in many ways." "Trauma." He tasted the word. "Yes, she has had more than her share. 3 mothers, Miss Hartley. 3 women who tried to love her and failed. Or perhaps I am the one who failed." He crossed to the desk and poured himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "Do you know what it is like to watch someone you love slip away? To see them weaken day by day and be powerless to stop it?" Catherine thought of her father burning, thought of kneeling in the snow beside his ruined body, thought of 5 years spent in the cold shadow of grief. "Yes," she said, "I do." Blackwell looked at her with sudden interest. "You were married, were you not? And lost your husband to fever." The lie she had told so many times. But standing in this house, looking into the eyes of a man who had buried 3 wives, the lie felt heavier than usual. "Yes. Then you understand. The helplessness, the rage at fate or God or whatever cruel force governs the universe. He drank the whiskey in one swallow. I loved my first wife, Miss Hartley, loved her with everything I had, and when she died I swore I would never love again, because love is the cruelest lie we tell ourselves. It promises forever and delivers only pain. Catherine wanted to hate him, needed to hate him. But in that moment, James Blackwell seemed less like a murderer and more like a man destroyed by loss. Mr. Blackwell, forgive my boldness, but have you considered that Eliza's difficulties might stem from being raised in a house filled with grief? Perhaps a change of scenery would help. You mean send her away to a boarding school, perhaps? He shook his head. I could not bear to lose her as well. She is all I have left of Margaret. But is she, Catherine asked softly, or is she a constant reminder of what you lost? Blackwell's eyes sharpened. For a moment Catherine thought she had gone too far, pushed too hard, but then his expression softened again. You are perceptive, Miss Hartley. Dangerously so. He set the glass down with careful precision. Yes, Eliza reminds me of Margaret every day. The same blonde hair, the same delicate features. Sometimes when the light is right, I can almost believe my first wife never died, that the past 7 years have been a terrible dream. And the other wives, Rose and Elena? Did they remind you of Margaret as well? Blackwell's smile was bitter. No, they were nothing like her. I chose them precisely because they were different. I thought perhaps if I married women who bore no resemblance to Margaret, I might finally escape her ghost. But the dead do not release us so easily. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Morrison returning with Eliza. The child looked pale, but composed. Well, Mr. Blackwell, the doctor said, I can find no physical cause for Eliza's distress. Her nightmares are likely a result of an overactive imagination combined with the natural anxieties of a child her age. I recommend more physical exercise during the day and perhaps a mild tonic before bed to help her sleep. Thank you, Doctor. Q. Blackwell showed the man out, leaving Catherine alone with Eliza. The child waited until the footsteps faded before speaking. He is lying, she whispered. Who is lying, Eliza? The doctor. He found something. I could see it in his eyes. But he will not tell Father because Father pays him too well. Eliza moved closer. Miss Hartley, you need to see the cellar. You need to see what is down there before it is too late. Too late for what? Before someone else dies. The words hung in the air between them. Catherine wanted to dismiss them as a child's fantasy, but Eliza's expression was utterly serious, utterly sane. I cannot simply wander around your home, Eliza. It would be inappropriate. Then I will show you. Tonight. Father is going to Deadwood on business. He will be gone until morning. Martha always goes to bed early. We can go down to the cellar, and you can see for yourself what happens in this house. Catherine knew she should refuse. Knew that accepting was dangerous and possibly foolish, but she had come to Lead for answers, and answers it seemed waited in the darkness beneath the Blackwell house. All right, she said, tonight. That evening, Catherine told the hotel clerk she was visiting a friend and would return late. She walked through the snowy streets of Lead as darkness fell. The town was loud with the sounds of miners finishing their shifts. Men stumbled from saloons already drunk. Women called from doorways offering warmth for a price. Lead was a town built on desperation and greed. A place where people came to find fortune and usually found only hardship. Catherine reached the Blackwell house just after 9 o'clock. The windows were mostly dark. A single lamp burned in what she now knew was Eliza's room. Catherine circled to the back of the house where a servant's entrance stood unlocked just as Eliza had promised. The kitchen was dark and cold. Catherine stood still, letting her eyes adjust. The house creaked around her, old wood settling, wind rattling windows, or perhaps something else. Perhaps the restless spirits Eliza claimed to see. A hand touched her shoulder. Catherine spun her hand, going to the small knife she had concealed in her boot. But it was only Eliza, a candle in one hand and a key in the other. This way, the child whispered. She led Catherine through the kitchen to a narrow door Catherine had noticed before, but never seen opened. Eliza fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a reluctant click. The door swung open on hinges that screamed for oil. Beyond was darkness and a staircase leading down. "Are you certain about this?" Catherine asked. Eliza's face was pale in the candlelight. "No, but we must see anyway." They descended into the cellar. The stairs were steep and narrow. The air grew colder with each step, damp and heavy with the smell of earth and stone and something else, something organic and wrong. At the bottom, Eliza held the candle high. They stood in a large room with a dirt floor and stone walls. Shelves lined one wall holding jars of preserved food and bottles of wine. A coal bin occupied one corner. Everything was ordinary, expected, except for the door on the far wall. It was newer than the rest of the cellar, heavy oak with iron reinforcements. And unlike every other door in the house, this one had a lock on the outside, as if designed not to keep people out, but to keep something in. Eliza crossed to the door. She tried the handle. Locked. But when she lifted the candle higher, Catherine saw that the top of the door did not quite meet the frame. There was a gap, perhaps 3 inches, just wide enough to see through if one stood on something. Catherine dragged a crate over and climbed onto it. She peered through the gap into the room beyond. At first she could see nothing. Then Eliza passed the candle up to her, and the light revealed what lay within. It was a small room, perhaps 10 feet square. The walls were bare stone. There was no furniture except for a narrow bed frame with rusted springs. But it was the chains that made Catherine's stomach turn. Heavy iron chains bolted to the wall, old, corroded, but still strong enough to hold a human being. And on the wall above the bed, scratched into the stone with something sharp words. Catherine could barely make them out in the flickering light. "He knows. The baby isn't his." Below that, in a different hand, more desperate, and scrawled, "God forgive me." And below that, the most terrible words of all, "Help us. Please. Someone help us." Catherine's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the candle. She climbed down from the crate, her mind reeling. "What did you see?" Eliza whispered. "Who was kept in there, Eliza? Who wrote those words? I do not know, but I found something else. In Father's study." The child reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I took this 3 months ago. I have been waiting for someone I could trust to show it to." Catherine unfolded the paper. It was a medical document, old. The ink faded, but still legible. A report from a doctor in Denver dated 1865. The patient was James Blackwell, age 25. The diagnosis was clear. Severe testicular trauma resulting from mining accident. Patient unlikely to father children. Catherine's mind raced through the implications. If Blackwell could not have children, then Eliza was not his biological daughter, nor could he have fathered children with any of his wives, which meant that if any of them had become pregnant, it would have been proof of infidelity. And a man like Blackwell, proud and controlled, would not tolerate such betrayal. "Eliza," Catherine said carefully, "do you know who your real father is?" The child's eyes filled with tears. "No. First mother never told me. But I heard her arguing with father once before she died. She said I was hers and that he had no right to me. He said I was his because he had claimed me, because he had given me his name." Eliza's voice broke. "Miss Hartley, am I the reason they died? Did father kill them because of me?" Catherine pulled the child into her arms. "No, you are not responsible for anything that happened in this house. You are innocent." But even as she said it, the pieces were falling into place. 3 women had entered this house. 3 women had borne or adopted children, and 3 women had died when those children proved they had been unfaithful. Unless the children were not proof of infidelity at all, unless something else was happening in this house. Something Catherine had not yet understood. "Eliza, what happened to your second mother, Rose? How did she die?" "She got sick. It started after she adopted Thomas. He was a baby from the orphanage. Father thought having a son would make her happy, but she only got sadder, and then she started getting sick. She could not eat, could not sleep. And then one morning, Martha found her dead in her bed. What happened to Thomas? Father sent him away, said he could not bear to keep the child after Rose died. I never saw him again." Catherine's blood ran cold. Another child, another death. The pattern was becoming clear. They climbed back up from the cellar in silence. Catherine's mind churned with questions and terrible possibilities. When they reached the kitchen, she turned to Eliza. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to keep a record of everything you remember, everything your mother said, everything you saw. Can you do that?" Eliza nodded. "I already have. I write it all down in a book I hide under my mattress, names and dates and all the things I am not supposed to remember." "Good. Keep that book safe. And Eliza, if anything happens to me, you take that book and you give it to Reverend Cross. Do you understand? Nothing is going to happen to you. Promise me, Eliza." The child's eyes were wide and frightened. "I promise." Catherine left through the back door and hurried through the dark streets back to her hotel. Her mind was racing. She had found evidence of something terrible in the Blackwell house. But evidence was not proof, and proof was what she needed if she was going to expose the truth. She was so consumed with her thoughts that she did not notice the figure waiting outside her hotel until she was nearly upon him. Will Morrison stepped out of the shadows. "We need to talk," he said. Catherine's hand moved to her knife, but Will held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am not here to threaten you. I am here because you went to the Blackwell house tonight, alone, at night, and that was phenomenally stupid. How did you know where I was? I have been watching you since the day you arrived. Did you really think I would let you wander around Lead without supervision?" He gestured toward the hotel. "Please, 5 minutes of your time. That is all I ask." Against her better judgment, Catherine led him to the small sitting room off the hotel lobby. It was late enough that they were alone. Will took a seat across from her, his expression serious. "What did you find in the cellar?" he asked. Catherine considered lying, considered telling him nothing. But something in his eyes stopped her, a kind of desperate urgency that suggested he was not her enemy. "A room with chains, words scratched into the walls, evidence that someone was held prisoner down there." Will's jaw tightened. "I was afraid of that." "What else?" "A medical report proving that James Blackwell cannot father children, and testimony from his daughter that all 3 of his wives either bore children or adopted children before they died." "Which means the children were not his," Will said quietly, "which gives him motive for murder." "So you admit he is guilty?" "No, I admit he has motive, but motive is not evidence, and everything you found tonight can be explained in other ways." Will leaned forward. "The room in the cellar could have been built by a previous owner. The medical report proves nothing except that Blackwell is sterile, and the testimony of a traumatized child is not reliable in a court of law." "Then what would you accept as proof?" Catherine demanded. "A witness, someone who saw the murders, or physical evidence, poison, a murder weapon, something concrete." He paused. "But even then, we would need to prove that Blackwell was the one who used it, and that is where this gets complicated." "Why?" Will reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. He set it on the table between them. Catherine picked it up, her hands trembling. The photograph showed a woman, perhaps 35 years old, with dark hair and a serious expression. She stood beside a man in a suit. They did not touch, but there was an intimacy to their posture that suggested a relationship. "Who is this?" Catherine asked. "That is Margaret Blackwell, James Blackwell's first wife. The photograph was taken 6 months before she supposedly died." Will pointed to the man in the picture. "And that is Dr. Robert Ashford, your father." The world tilted. Catherine stared at the photograph, at her father's face, at the woman standing beside him. "I do not understand. Your father knew Margaret Blackwell, treated her for what he believed was arsenic poisoning. He documented everything, wrote to colleagues, tried to build a case against her husband, but before he could prove anything, his clinic burned and he died." Will's voice was gentle. "And Margaret Blackwell died 3 months later, or at least that is what the official record says." Catherine's mind reeled. "Are you suggesting my father had an affair with Margaret Blackwell?" "I am suggesting they had a relationship. Whether it was romantic or simply professional, I cannot say. But your father was trying to save her life, and he failed. Just as he failed to save Rose and Elena. How do you know all this?" Will was silent for a long moment. Then he reached up and removed his hat. In the lamplight, Catherine could see his face clearly for the first time. The strong jawline, the blue eyes, the shape of his nose, features she had seen before, in a photograph, in a mirror. "My name is William Ashford Morrison," he said quietly. "Robert Ashford, was my father, which makes you my half-sister Clara." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. "That is not possible. My father never mentioned another family." "Because he was ashamed. He had a brief relationship with my mother when he was young, before he married your mother. I was the result. He supported us financially but never publicly acknowledged me." Will's expression was sad. "When he died, I inherited his medical practice, his notes, his journals, everything he had collected about the Blackwell case. I have spent 3 years continuing his work, trying to finish what he started." "Why should I believe you?" "Because I can prove it." Will pulled out a leather wallet. From it he extracted a birth certificate. William Ashford Morrison, father Robert Ashford, mother Catherine Morrison. Catherine sank back into her chair. Her mother's name had been Catherine. Her father had named his bastard son after her. The irony was almost funny. "You used her name," Will said softly. "Catherine Hartley. You took our mother's first name and a fake surname. Did you do it consciously, or was it instinct?" "I do not know." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "I do not know anything anymore." Will reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. "You are not alone in this, Clara. You never were. I have been watching over you since you left Chicago, following your trail, trying to keep you safe. And now we are here, together. We can finish what our father started." Catherine looked at their joined hands, thought of 5 years spent alone, 5 years of grief and rage and desperate planning. And now suddenly she had a brother, family, someone who understood. The tears came without warning, great wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Will moved around the table and pulled her into his arms. He held her while she cried, held her while 5 years of pain poured out in a flood of grief. "I am sorry," she gasped when she could speak again. "I am sorry I did not know you. I am sorry Father kept you a secret. I am sorry for everything." "None of that is your fault." Will's voice was rough with his own emotion. "We are here now. That is what matters." They sat together in the quiet hotel sitting room while the clock ticked toward midnight. Catherine felt something shift inside her. The hard, cold shell she had built around herself began to crack. For the first time in 5 years, she was not alone. "What do we do now?" she asked finally. "We investigate, carefully, methodically. We gather evidence that will stand up in a court of law, and we do it together." Will's expression hardened. "But Clara, you need to understand something. This is not about revenge anymore. This is about justice, and those are 2 very different things." "I know." "Do you?" "Because revenge is personal. It is emotional. It makes you reckless. But justice requires patience. It requires setting aside your feelings and focusing on the truth, even if that truth is not what you want to hear." Catherine met his eyes. "And if the truth is that James Blackwell is guilty, that he murdered 3 women, including the woman our father tried to save, what then? Then we make sure he hangs for it. But only if we can prove it beyond a shadow of doubt." Will released her hand and stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start working together, as a team, as family." After he left, Catherine sat alone in the darkened room. She thought about everything that had happened, the cellar, the chains, the medical report, and now a brother she had never known existed. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but the picture they formed was stranger and darker than Catherine had ever imagined. She went to her room and retrieved her father's journal. She read through the entries with new eyes, looking for mentions of William, looking for anything that might explain the connection between her father and Margaret Blackwell. And there, buried in the final pages, she found it. A letter her father had written but never sent. The ink was faded but still legible. "My dearest Margaret, I have done everything I can to help you, but James knows. He knows about the poison. He knows about Eliza's true father, and I fear he knows about us. You must leave that house. Take Eliza and run. I will help you, I will protect you, but you must trust me. Please, Margaret, before it is too late. Yours always, Robert." Catherine's hands shook as she read the words. Her father had loved Margaret Blackwell, had been willing to risk everything to save her, and Margaret had stayed, had chosen to remain in that house with a man who knew her secrets, who knew that Eliza was not his child. Why? What could possibly make a woman stay with a man who had discovered her infidelity unless she had not stayed willingly, unless she had been kept there, prisoner in her own home? Catherine thought of the room in the cellar, the chains, the desperate words scratched into stone. Margaret Blackwell had not died of childbed fever. She had been held prisoner, possibly for years, and when she finally died, Blackwell had simply found a new wife, a new victim. But if that was true, where did Martha fit into the picture, the housekeeper who moved through the Blackwell house like a ghost, who watched everything with her flat, emotionless eyes? Catherine needed to talk to Martha, needed to find out what the woman knew, but approaching her directly would be dangerous. If Martha was loyal to Blackwell, any questions would be reported immediately, unless there was another way. Catherine pulled out a piece of hotel stationery and began to write. A careful letter, innocent on the surface but with a coded message beneath. She addressed it to Martha at the Blackwell house and paid a boy outside the hotel to deliver it first thing in the morning. Then she sat by the window, watching the dark shape of the Blackwell house on the hill. Somewhere in that house, Eliza was sleeping. Somewhere in that house, terrible secrets waited. And tomorrow Catherine and Will would begin unraveling them, together. The night deepened toward dawn. Catherine did not sleep. Instead, she thought about her father, about the choices he had made, the secrets he had kept, the love he had hidden. Robert Ashford had not been a perfect man. He had fathered a child out of wedlock, had fallen in love with a married woman, had kept secrets from his legitimate family, but he had also been a good man, a man who tried to save people, who fought for justice even when it cost him everything. Catherine hoped she was half as brave. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Catherine made a decision. She would continue her work as Eliza's tutor, would maintain her cover as Catherine Hartley. But now she would not be working alone. She had Will, her brother, her ally. And together they would expose the truth about the Blackwell house, no matter how terrible that truth might be. She thought of her father's letter to Margaret Blackwell, the desperate plea to run, to trust him, and she thought of the words scratched into the cellar wall. "Help us, please, someone help us." "I am here," Catherine whispered to the ghosts of the Blackwell house. "I am here and I will help you. I promise." Outside lead began to wake, miners heading to the early shift, shop owners opening their doors, life continuing as it always did in a boomtown built on gold and desperation. But Catherine Ashford, who called herself Catherine Hartley, who had once been Clara Ashford, sat in her hotel room and planned her next move in a game that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Because now she knew the truth. James Blackwell was not just a murderer. He was a man who kept his victims alive, who locked them in the cellar and let them waste away while the world above believed them dead. And somewhere in that house there might still be someone who needed saving. Catherine stood and began to prepare for the day ahead. She had work to do, evidence to gather, a killer to expose, and a little girl to protect, no matter what it cost her. The letter came back unopened. Catherine stood in her hotel room 3 days after sending her carefully coded message to Martha, staring at the envelope that had been returned with a single word scrawled across it in unfamiliar handwriting. Number, not returned to sender, not refused, just that single syllable. A denial, a warning, or perhaps an invitation depending on how one chose to interpret it. Catherine turned the envelope over in her hands. The handwriting was feminine but strong, educated, not the hand of a simple housekeeper. She thought of Martha moving through the Blackwell house with her flat eyes and careful silence, a woman who saw everything and said nothing, a woman who had secrets of her own. Will arrived at noon as they had arranged. He came through the back entrance of the hotel, avoiding the front desk where the clerk was beginning to take too much interest in Catherine's frequent male visitor. They met in her room. Propriety be damned. There were larger concerns than reputation. "I received a response," Catherine said, handing him the envelope. Will examined it with the careful attention he brought to everything. "This is not Martha's handwriting. I have seen her signature on household accounts. Her script is simpler, more labored." "Then who wrote it?" "That is an excellent question." Will set the envelope on the small table by the window. "I have news as well. I spoke with Reverend Cross, carefully, without revealing our connection or our true purpose. I asked him about the confessions he heard from the dying women." Catherine's pulse quickened. "And he would not violate the seal of confession directly, but he said something interesting. He said that all three women asked forgiveness for the same sin. Not adultery, not betrayal, but silence." Will's eyes met hers. They asked God to forgive them for keeping silent about something they had witnessed, something terrible. They were witnesses, not victims. Or both. Witnesses who became victims because of what they knew. Will moved to the window, looking out at the Blackwell house in the distance. "I have been thinking about the room in the cellar, the chains, the words on the wall. What if we have been looking at this backwards?" "What do you mean?" "We assumed the room was a prison, a place where Blackwell kept his wives captive. But what if it was a refuge, a place where someone hid from something worse?" Catherine felt the pieces shifting in her mind, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. "You think the wives locked themselves in that room? I think someone did. And I think that someone might still be in that house." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "We need to get back into that cellar," Catherine said. "We need to search it properly, look for evidence we might have missed." "Agreed. But not during the day, not while Blackwell is home." Will turned from the window. "Tonight, we go together, and we bring weapons." They made their plans carefully. Will would create a distraction at the front of the house. A fire in the woodshed. Nothing dangerous, just enough smoke to draw attention. While Blackwell and Martha dealt with it, Catherine would slip in through the kitchen and down to the cellar. She would have 15 minutes, maybe 20, enough time to search the locked room if she could find a way inside. "And if we are caught," Catherine asked. "Then we run, and we hope we are faster than a man with a rifle." It was not a comforting answer, but it was an honest one. That evening, Catherine dressed in dark clothing. She concealed her small pistol in a pocket sewn into her skirt. The knife went into her boot. She pulled her hair back and covered it with a dark scarf. In the mirror, she looked like a stranger, a woman preparing for war. Perhaps that was what she had become. Will was waiting outside the hotel. He wore similar dark clothes. He carried no visible weapons, but Catherine knew he would be armed. A man did not spend 3 years investigating a potential murderer without learning to protect himself. They walked through the dark streets of lead. The town was quieter tonight. A storm was coming. Catherine could feel it in the air, that peculiar heaviness that preceded snow. The miners had retreated indoors. Even the saloons were subdued. The Blackwell house rose before them like a monument to secrets. Every window was lit, too bright for a house where only 3 people lived, as if the light could push back the darkness that dwelt within. Will touched her shoulder. 15 minutes. If I am not at the back door by then, you leave without me." "I am not leaving you." "Yes, you are. Because if we are both caught, no one will ever know the truth about what happened in that house. Promise me, Clara." She hated that he was right. Hated the cold logic of it, but she nodded. 15 minutes. Will disappeared around the side of the house toward the woodshed. Catherine counted to 100. Then she moved toward the kitchen door. It was unlocked, just as it had been the last time. She slipped inside and stood still, listening. Voices upstairs, Blackwell and Eliza. The child was reading aloud from a book. Her voice was clear and steady. No fear in it. Whatever horrors lived in this house, Eliza had learned to navigate them. Catherine moved quickly through the kitchen to the cellar door. She had brought a small lantern this time. Better than a candle for illumination. She lit it and descended into the darkness. The cellar was exactly as she remembered. Shelves of preserved food, the coal bin, and the locked door at the far end. Catherine crossed to it and examined the lock. It was old, but well maintained. She pulled a thin piece of wire from her pocket, a trick she had learned from a former thief in Chicago. Not a skill a respectable schoolteacher would possess, but Clara Ashford had never been entirely respectable. The lock resisted, then yielded. The door swung open on silent hinges. The room beyond was smaller than Catherine remembered, the bed frame with its rusted springs, the chains bolted to the wall, and the words scratched into the stone. But now, with better light, she could see more. could see that the scratches were not just words, they were a record, a diary written in desperation on a stone canvas. Margaret, first wife, died 1873, except the date was crossed out, and below it a new date, 1879. This year, this month. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She raised the lantern higher and saw what she had missed before. In the corner of the room, a pile of blankets, and beneath the blankets, the shape of a human body. Catherine's hands shook as she crossed the room. She knelt beside the blankets and pulled them back. A woman lay there, thin to the point of starvation. Her hair was long and gray, though her face suggested she was no more than 40. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. "Margaret," Catherine whispered. The woman's eyes opened. They were blue, the same startling blue as Eliza's eyes. "Who are you?" The voice was barely audible, a whisper worn down by years of disuse. "My name is Clara Ashford. Robert Ashford was my father." Something flickered in those blue eyes, recognition, and tears. "Robert, he tried to save me, tried to make me leave, but I could not leave my baby. Eliza, she is upstairs. She is safe." "Not safe, never safe, not while he knows." Margaret's hand moved weak and trembling to clutch Catherine's sleeve. "You have to get her out, have to take her away from this house, before Martha kills again." Catherine's mind reeled. "Martha, I do not understand. I thought Blackwell was the killer. James has never killed anyone. He is guilty of many things. Cruelty, pride, the sin of silence, but not murder." Margaret's breathing was labored, each word an effort. "Martha is Margaret. I am Margaret. We are the same person." Catherine sat back on her heels. The pieces were falling into place, falling into a pattern so twisted she could barely comprehend it. "You faked your death." "Yes. After Eliza was born, I knew James would discover she was not his. Robert and I, we had an affair. Brief, foolish, but Eliza was the result. I could not let James hurt her, so I died. Or I made him believe I died, and I became Martha, the grieving husband's faithful housekeeper. But why stay? You could have run, taken Eliza and disappeared. Because James would have found us, would have hunted us to the ends of the earth. He could not father children, you see, could not bear the shame of the world knowing. So I made a bargain. I would serve him, be his prisoner, and he would let Eliza live, would raise her as his daughter, would give her his name and his fortune." Catherine felt sick. And the other wives rose, and Elena. Margaret's expression twisted into something that might have been guilt or might have been defiance. Margaret's expression twisted into something that might have been guilt or might have been defiance. They discovered the truth. Rose found letters, old letters I had hidden years ago, letters from Robert proving Eliza was his child, not James's. She threatened to expose everything, said she would tell the town that the great James Blackwell had raised a bastard, that she would have Eliza declared illegitimate and sent away. Catherine's stomach turned, and Elena, worse. Elena suspected I was Margaret. She found jewelry I had hidden in the cellar, my wedding ring from my true marriage to James. She was going to confront him. And if James knew I had been living under his roof all those years playing servant while watching him marry other women. Margaret's voice cracked. He would have killed us both, Eliza and me. To erase his shame, I had to act first. So you killed them. I poisoned them, slowly, over months, made it look like natural illness. James knew. He has always known, but he said nothing, did nothing. Because my punishment was worse than death, serving the man I betrayed, watching my daughter call him father, living in the shadows while other women took my place. Catherine stood. Her legs were unsteady. "You are a monster." "I am a mother. I did what I had to do to protect my child. You murdered 2 innocent women." "There are no innocent people in this house." Margaret's voice grew stronger, bitter. "Rose knew what James was, knew he was sterile. She married him for his money. Elena was a fool sent by her father to secure a business deal. Neither of them loved him. Neither of them cared about Eliza. They were using us, all of us." Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to insist that nothing justified murder, but she thought of her own quest for revenge, her own willingness to destroy lives in pursuit of justice. Who was she to judge? "Where is my father's journal?" Catherine asked. "The one he kept about your case." Margaret's laugh was bitter. Burned. James found the original after Robert died, burned it along with the letters he sent me, tried to erase every trace of our connection. She paused, her eyes meeting Catherine's. But Robert was careful. He sent copies to colleagues in Chicago, to medical societies, to William. Her gaze dropped to Catherine's pocket. You have been carrying one all along, have you not? That is how you knew to come here. Catherine's hand moved instinctively to where she kept the journal hidden. My family's lawyer had it, among my father's effects. He said father sent it before he died, as insurance. Insurance that failed him, but perhaps not you. Catherine heard footsteps above, heavy boots on wooden floors. Her 15 minutes were up. I have to go. Wait. Margaret struggled to sit up. Eliza, my daughter, she knows everything. I told her. I thought if she understood she would forgive me, but she has not spoken to me in 3 years, pretends I am only Martha, treats me like a servant. Tears ran down the wasted face. Take her away from here, please, before the poison in this house destroys her too. Catherine wanted to refuse, wanted to leave this woman to rot in her self-made prison. But she thought of Eliza, drawing pictures of dead women, seeing ghosts that might not be ghosts at all. I will try. She left the room and climbed the stairs, emerged into the kitchen just as smoke began to filter through the windows. Will's distraction, right on schedule. But before Catherine could reach the back door, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She spun to find Eliza standing behind her. The child's face was pale, her eyes enormous. You found her, Eliza whispered. You found my mother. Yes. Did she tell you what she did? Yes. Good. Then you know we are all monsters here. Father who allows murder, mother who commits it, and me. Eliza's voice was eerily calm. I knew. I watched Mother poison second Mother Rose, watched her put the powder in her tea, and I said nothing, because I was afraid if Mother went away, I would be alone. Catherine knelt in front of the child. You were a little girl. You are not responsible for what adults did. I am 10 now, old enough to know right from wrong, old enough to understand that my silence makes me guilty too. Eliza looked toward the cellar door. Is she dying? I think so, yes. Good. Then perhaps we can all finally be free. The words were spoken with such cold finality that Catherine shivered. But before she could respond, a shout came from outside. Will's voice, calling for help. The fire must have spread beyond his control. Catherine ran to the back door and threw it open. The woodshed was engulfed in flames, real flames, not the small controlled fire Will had planned, and Will was nowhere to be seen. She ran toward the fire. Behind her, she heard Blackwell's voice, felt, rather than saw, Eliza following. The heat from the burning woodshed was intense. Sparks were already catching on the main house, on the dry shingles of the roof. Will, Catherine screamed. Will, where are you? A figure emerged from the smoke. But it was not Will. It was James Blackwell. He carried a bucket of water that would do nothing against the inferno. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wild. Get back, he shouted at Catherine. The whole house is going to go. There is a man in there, my brother. Blackwell's expression changed. Understanding and something else. Resignation, perhaps. He dropped the bucket and ran toward the burning shed. Catherine tried to follow, but strong arms held her back. She turned to find Martha. Number Margaret. The woman who had been dead and was alive. Who had killed 2 women and lived in shadows for 7 years. Let me go. Catherine fought against the grip, but Margaret was stronger than she looked. He is already dead, Margaret said flatly. The shed collapsed. I saw it. No one could survive that. Catherine's scream was primal, wordless. She tore free from Margaret's grasp and ran toward the fire, but the heat drove her back. The smoke choked her. She fell to her knees in the snow, coughing and sobbing. And then, emerging from the flames like a figure from hell itself, James Blackwell appeared. He carried Will in his arms. Will's face was burned, his clothes smoking, but his chest moved. He was breathing. Blackwell laid Will in the snow and collapsed beside him. Catherine crawled to her brother and took his hand. His eyes opened, focused on her face. The journal, he rasped. In my coat. Take it. Catherine reached into Will's coat with shaking hands. Found a leather-bound book, smaller than her father's, but similar. She pulled it out and opened it to the first page. The Journal of William Ashford Morrison, being a complete account of the crimes committed in the Blackwell household, 1876 to 1879. Will had documented everything. 3 years of investigation, witness statements, medical records, timelines, everything their father had tried to prove and failed. "I finished his work," Will whispered. "Finished what he started. The truth is all there." Behind them, the Blackwell house was fully engulfed now. The flames reached toward the night sky. Catherine watched numbly as windows exploded outward from the heat, as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Eliza stood perfectly still watching her home burn. Her face showed no emotion. She held something in her hand. A small book, her diary, Catherine realized. The record of everything the child had witnessed. Margaret stood apart from all of them. And then Catherine saw what was about to happen. Blackwell had risen, was moving toward Margaret. His face was no longer resigned. It was twisted with rage. "You," he said. His voice cut through the roar of the flames. "You destroyed everything. My wives, my reputation, my daughter's innocence." He grabbed Margaret by the throat. "This ends tonight." Margaret clawed at his hands. She was weak from years of malnutrition, years of living in shadows. But she fought with the desperation of a mother protecting her young. "I did it for Eliza," she gasped. "Everything I did was to keep her safe from you, safe from me." Blackwell's laugh was terrible. "I gave her my name, my fortune. I raised her as my own, even knowing she was another man's bastard, and you repaid me by murdering my wives, by living in my house like a ghost, mocking me every day with your presence. You kept me prisoner. You used my love for my daughter to chain me here. You chained yourself. You chose this." His grip tightened. "But no more. No more lies. No more shadows. We end this now." Catherine ran toward them, but Will's hand caught her arm, held her back. "Let me go," Catherine struggled. "He is killing her." "Wait," Will said. "Look." Margaret's hand had found something, a piece of burning timber. She swung it with the last of her strength, caught Blackwell across the temple. He stumbled backward, released her. Margaret fell to her knees, coughing, gasping for air. Blackwell stood at the edge of the burning woodshed. Blood ran down his face from where the timber had struck him. He looked at Margaret, at Eliza standing in the snow, at the house burning behind him. "It is finished," he said quietly. "All of it have finished." And then he stepped backward into the flames. The woodshed collapsed inward. Blackwell disappeared in an explosion of sparks and smoke. Catherine heard Margaret scream, a sound of such anguish it seemed torn from her soul. "James, no!" But he was gone, consumed by the fire he had helped create through years of silence and pride and twisted love. A sound of such profound grief that it seemed to come from the earth itself. Catherine ran forward. Through the smoke and heat, she could see Margaret's form crumpled near the collapsed woodshed, still moving, still breathing. "Help me!" Catherine shouted to Will. Together they dragged Margaret away from the flames. Her clothes were singed, her face was burned, but she was alive. "James," Margaret whispered, "I did not mean. I only wanted—" "Do not speak," Catherine said. "Save your strength." Margaret's hand clutched Catherine's with surprising force. "Tell Eliza. Tell her I loved her, that everything was for her." Then her eyes closed, but her chest still rose and fell, shallow, labored, but breathing. She would survive, against all odds, against justice, perhaps, but she would survive. Eliza walked to Catherine and took her hand. "He is with my first mother now," the child said quietly. "The one he really loved. Perhaps that is better." The fire burned through the night. By morning, nothing remained of the Blackwell house but blackened timbers and ash. The whole town turned out to watch, to whisper, to speculate about what had happened. The official story was simple. A terrible accident, a woodshed fire that spread. James Blackwell died trying to save his home. A tragedy. The kind of thing that happened in mining towns where life was cheap and death familiar. No one mentioned the woman who had been dead for 7 years and was found very much alive. No one spoke of poison or murder or the sins hidden in that house. The town had already moved on, already forgotten. But Catherine would never forget. Will survived. The burns were severe but not fatal. Doctor Morrison, the same doctor who had examined Eliza, tended to him with skill born of years treating mining accidents. He asked no questions about how Will came to be in the Blackwell woodshed. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. Catherine sat beside her brother's bed for 3 days while he drifted in and out of fevered sleep. She read to him from his journal, saw the careful work he had done, the truth he had uncovered piece by painful piece. Margaret Blackwell was arrested. The evidence in Will's journal was damning. Testimony from servants who had seen her preparing tea for Rose and Elena, records from the Denver apothecary where she had purchased arsenic under a false name, the timing of the deaths corresponding with her presence in the house. She confessed without resistance, told the judge and jury everything, about her affair with Robert Ashford, about faking her death to protect Eliza, about murdering Rose and Elena to preserve her daughter's inheritance. The trial lasted 2 days. The verdict was guilty in 2 counts of murder. But the judge, perhaps moved by the twisted complexity of the case, sentenced her to 10 years in prison rather than hanging, a mercy she did not deserve, but received nonetheless. On the day of sentencing, Margaret asked to see Eliza one final time. Catherine brought the child to the courthouse. They sat in a small room while guards waited outside. Margaret's hands were chained. Her face was drawn. But her eyes, those startling blue eyes, were filled with desperate love. "I am sorry," Margaret whispered, "for everything, for the lies, for the murders, for being too weak to protect you without destroying others." Eliza said nothing. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. "Will you write to me?" Margaret asked. "In prison, will you let me know you are safe?" Still nothing. Margaret began to cry, silent tears that ran down her thin face. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but please, please do not forget me. I am still your mother, no matter what I have done." Eliza stood. She moved around the table and embraced Margaret, the woman who had given birth to her, who had killed for her, who had lived in shadows for 7 years to keep her safe. "I will remember you," Eliza said quietly, "always. But I cannot forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever." It was more than Margaret had any right to expect, and less than she desperately needed. When they left the courthouse, Eliza took Catherine's hand. "Where will I go now?" the child asked. "With me," Catherine said, "and with Will. We are your family now, if you will have us." "You are not my family. We share no blood." Family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about choice, about the people who stay when everyone else leaves. Catherine knelt in the snow so she could look Eliza in the eyes. "We are choosing you, Eliza. Will and I, we want to take care of you, to give you a home where you can heal, where you can be a child instead of a witness to horrors." Eliza studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I choose you too." 6 months later, in a small church in a town 300 miles from Lead Catherine Ashford, married William Morrison. The ceremony was simple. A handful of witnesses, Reverend Cross, who had traveled to officiate, Dr. Morrison, who gave the bride away since her father was long dead, and Eliza, who stood beside Catherine in a new dress the color of spring flowers, who smiled, a real smile, perhaps the first genuine smile the child had managed since the fire. Catherine wore a dress of pale blue, nothing like the elaborate gown she had once imagined for her wedding. But this was not the life she had imagined, not the revenge she had planned. It was something stranger, something better. Will stood at the altar waiting for her. His face was scarred from the burns. He would carry those scars forever. But his eyes were clear, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. "I, William Morrison, take you, Clara Catherine Ashford, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." Catherine repeated the vows, meant every word. This man who was her brother and her partner and now her husband. This strange, twisted family they had created from the ashes of tragedy. When the ceremony ended, they stood together on the church steps, a family, imperfect, scarred, but together. "Where do we go now?" Eliza asked. "Montana," Will said. I have purchased a small ranch, nothing grand, but it has good land, room for a family to grow." "And what about lead?" Catherine asked. "What about the truth? What about making sure people know what happened in that house? The truth is in the court records, in my journal, in the testimony given at Margaret's trial. Anyone who wants to know can find it." Will took her hand. "But we are done hunting ghosts, Clara. We are done seeking revenge. It is time to build something instead of destroying. Time to heal instead of hurt." Catherine looked back at the church, thought of her father, of the 5 years she had spent consumed by the need for vengeance, of everything she had lost and everything she had found. "Yes," she said finally, "it is time." They traveled to Montana as spring turned to summer. The ranch was small but well built, a log cabin with a wide porch and windows that let in the light, pastures for horses and cattle, a creek that ran cold and clear with snowmelt. Eliza took to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm. She learned to ride, to tend the garden, to gather eggs from the chickens. She still drew pictures, but they were different now, flowers and horses, the creek and the mountains, living things instead of dead. At night Catherine would read to her, stories of adventure and hope. Fairy tales where the princess did not sleep for 100 years, but woke and saved herself. Will worked the ranch with steady determination. His burns healed slowly, left him with limited use of his left hand, but he adapted. Learned to rope and ride one-handed, hired help when needed, built something solid and real, and Catherine found peace she had not known was possible. She taught school in the nearby town, came home to a family that chose her as much as she chose them, planted a garden, learned to bake bread, did all the ordinary things she had thought would never matter. But some nights when the wind was right, she would stand on the porch and think of lead, of the house that had burned, of the woman locked in prison for crimes committed in the name of love, of the man who had walked into fire rather than face his guilt. On one such night, Will found her standing alone beneath the stars. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly, "that we did not get the revenge you sought?" Catherine thought about the question, about the girl she had been when she arrived in Lead, consumed by rage, willing to destroy anyone who stood between her and vengeance, and about the woman she was now, scarred, wiser, softer in some ways and harder in others. "No," she said finally, "I thought revenge would fill the emptiness, would make me whole again, but it would have only made me hollow. What we have now, this life, this family, that is what makes me whole." Will put his arm around her shoulders. They stood together watching the night sky. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen light. Inside, Eliza was sleeping. Dreaming, Catherine hoped of better things than ghosts and dead women. The past would always be there, would always shape them. But it did not have to define them. They were more than the sum of their tragedies, more than victims or survivors or seekers of vengeance. They were a family, imperfect, scarred, built on ashes and secrets and the ruins of other lives, but a family nonetheless. And that Catherine had learned was enough. 3 years after the fire, Catherine received a letter. It came from the women's prison in Denver, where Margaret Blackwell served her sentence. Catherine almost did not open it, almost threw it in the fire unread, but in the end, curiosity won. The letter was brief, written in the same strong hand that had scrawled "No" on Catherine's first attempt at contact. "Dear Miss Ashford, I am writing to inform you that my sentence has been reduced for good behavior. I will be released in 7 years rather than 10. I wanted you to know because I hope to see my daughter when I am free. I hope you will not prevent that reunion. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am asking anyway. Please tell Eliza that I love her, that I have always loved her, that everything I did, terrible as it was, came from that love. I do not expect her to forgive me. I do not forgive myself. But I hope that someday she will understand that mothers are not saints or monsters. We are simply human, and humans make terrible choices when we are afraid. Thank you for giving her the life I could not, for being the mother she deserved. Yours, Margaret Blackwell." Catherine read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Someday, when Eliza was older, she would give it to her, would let the girl decide whether to see her mother, whether to offer forgiveness or maintain the distance. But not today. Today Eliza was 13 years old and learning to break horses with Will. Today she was laughing, free, unburdened by the weight of adult choices. Let her have that. Let her have a few more years of innocence before the past came calling again. Catherine went outside and watched Eliza work with a young mare. The girl had her mother's eyes, her mother's determination. But she had something else, too. Something neither Margaret nor James Blackwell had possessed. Hope. The hope that the future could be better than the past, that the sins of the parents need not be visited upon the children. That love could be something other than possession or obsession or desperate murderous protection. Will came to stand beside Catherine. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how we break cycles. About how we become something other than what we were made to be." He nodded. Understanding without need for explanation. That was the gift of their strange partnership, the ability to comprehend each other's silences. "She will be all right," Will said, watching Eliza. "Despite everything, she will be all right." "Yes," Catherine agreed. "She will." And in that moment, standing in the Montana sunshine with her brother, her husband, her partner, watching the child they had saved grow into someone strong and whole, Catherine finally let go of the last of her anger. Her father's death had brought her to lead, had set in motion everything that followed. But his death did not define her anymore, did not drive her, did not consume her with the need for vengeance. Robert Ashford would have wanted justice, would have wanted the truth exposed, and they had done that, had brought Margaret Blackwell to trial, had ensured the record showed what really happened in that house of shadows. But more than justice, Robert Ashford would have wanted his children to live, to thrive, to find happiness despite the darkness. And they had. Against all odds, against every expectation, they had built something good from the ruins of tragedy. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine sat on the porch with her journal, the journal her father had kept, the one she had carried for 5 years like a talisman against forgetting. She opened it to the last page. To the letter her father had written to Margaret Blackwell, the plea to run, to trust him. Catherine took her pen and added her own words beneath his. "Father, you tried to save her, tried to protect her and Eliza both. You failed. But your failure was not for lack of courage or love. It was simply that some people cannot be saved. Some people choose their prisons. Margaret chose hers, and James chose his silence. But Will and I, we chose differently. We chose life. We chose to break the cycle of pain. I hope that wherever you are, you can see what we have built, can see that your death, terrible as it was, led to this, to family, to healing, to hope. I miss you. I will always miss you. But I am no longer defined by your absence. I carry you with me, but I am not weighed down by you. Thank you for teaching me to fight, for teaching me to seek truth, for teaching me to love deeply enough to risk everything. I am your daughter, and I am proud to be. Rest now. The battle is over. We won. Not the way you planned, not the way I imagined, but we won nonetheless. Your loving daughter, Clara." She closed the journal and set it aside. Tomorrow she would put it away, lock it in a trunk with the other relics of the past, keep it safe for Eliza someday or for children yet to come. But tonight she would sit on this porch with her husband and watch the stars emerge one by one, would listen to Eliza practicing piano inside the house, would breathe the clear mountain air and feel grateful. Grateful for second chances, for family found in unlikely places, for the resilience of the human spirit, for the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. The widowmaker's daughter had come to lead seeking revenge, had found instead something far more valuable. She had found herself, and in doing so, she had finally come home.